welcome everybody. We've got attendees all over the country, Michigan, Texas, all over here in the beautiful Carolinas, which are a little chilly and drizzly today. And welcome to the third annual Alta Pro Lawyers Wellness Webinar. It's been 3 years since Alta Pro started our webinars online for a year on topics from cybersecurity to cyber ethics to cannabis law, client relations, you name it. And 3 years ago, with the holiday stress, the stress of family and gift giving, end of year to-do lists to check off, wanting to start the new year off right, and some weather issues too, we decided to have a wellness webinar. And we weren't sure how it would go over. To be honest, we were sort of a little unsure. We knew they liked cyber. Our insureds love cyber webinars. What about wellness? Well, the numbers speak for themselves. Hundreds and hundreds. These are our most popular webinars. And at this one, nearly 500 people have signed up all across the country, lawyers, legal professionals, and here we are. So thanks so much for that. To help you, we've got a triple whammy of a speaker. She's not only practiced law, she's been there. She now mediates. So she brings lawyers and businesses and litigants together and tries to help them solve problems. And I know one of her special loves is wellness and well-being. So Colleen, thanks so much for being here. And I want to jump right in. I know in your writing, you talk a lot about the ABA study that sort of was groundbreaking in many ways. A few years ago, the American Bar Association put out a well-being study. And I would just like for you to start by telling our audience what that study was all about, where we are now a few years later as a profession with regard to the ABA study, and sort of what impact that had on you.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. I'm happy to be here. Nice to see everybody checking in from lots of different states across the country. And so in 2017, the ABA formed a national task force on lawyer well-being. It was conceptualized, it was a collaboration between the ABA Commission on Lawyer Assistance Programs and the National Organization of Bar Counsel and the Association of Professional Responsibility Lawyers. So a couple pivotal things that it did. One was it raised awareness of these important well-being issues. Two, it was a collaboration at a national level of many different interested entities pulling lots of stakeholders together. And then three, it's provided us with some data, if nothing else, a beginning measuring stick, sort of taking the pulse of where are we as an industry. It was two different studies. They surveyed practicing attorneys as well as law students. Their sample size was well over 3,000 people. And unsurprisingly, even though it was pre-pandemic numbers, they found anxiety, stress, isolation, suicidal thoughts, problem drinking. This was all self-reported, a whole host of challenges that are exacerbated in the legal industry.
Well, we have had as speakers and writers to the Alta Pro seminar, some of the ABA people who were looking into wellness. Michael Kahn is a lawyer. I see you nodding your head. You and Michael, I'll bet, have crossed paths because both of you are leaders in the lawyer wellness. Again, having done it and now being licensed to help lawyers do it better, or at least in a more enjoyable and healthy way, especially at this time of year with all the good stress. It's not all bad stress. A lot of it is good. Family coming to visit, sometimes with their dogs, I've learned. So lots of good stress, but dealing with stress has a lot to do with it. This report was a few years ago, and it got everybody's attention. I know I wrote about it a lot. Where do you think we are now? Are we making progress? What would you like to see happen? Uh, where do you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great question. So for anyone who is interested individually, additionally, if you're in a leadership role, maybe with your firm or in-house with a company, um, check out the ABA's website, the National Task Force on Lawyer Well-being. They have plenty of resources. There is a phenomenal toolkit. Admittedly, it's a bit overwhelming at first. I think it's a 96-page PDF, but there is a toolkit that Anne Bradford wrote and that was sponsored by the ABA that is specifically for lawyers and legal employers. And it outlines specific recommendations. It has sample checklists, sample things that individuals and employers in the legal profession can do to help us move the needle forward to create healthier workplaces. And of course, that matters to us individually, but it also matters to us at an organizational level, right? We're going to have more productive businesses if our employees are better, right? So, on an individual level, to be a good lawyer, we have to be a healthy level. On an organizational level, there are all sorts of studies coming out of various businesses. Harvard Business Review, the US Surgeon General just recently, within the last month or two, released a framework for workplace mental health and well-being that underscores this connection between well-being and the health of an organization, right? So it makes sense to invest in employee well-being because you're going to get a return on that investment in productivity, performance, and retention. And those are all really important issues that entities, whether you're in the legal industry or not, are facing today. So I think we have a lot of room for growth. I think the pandemic certainly set us back. It illuminated various additional problems and challenges. But I think we've moved the needle on talking about these issues, on giving national attention to them, on giving credibility to these issues, and I think on making that link between this is not just an individual's responsibility. It's not just an individual problem. It's a industry problem. It's an organizational challenge. And it makes sense for all of us to come together to work on it, not just for the benefit of us individually, but for the good of the organizations to perform better.
Absolutely. And I can attest to the fact that I'm the old guy in the room here. And I can attest to the fact that we've started talking about these issues much more lately. And I look back at when I started in the carbon copy age, and we didn't talk about issues like this. That doesn't mean they didn't exist. So I think we've made a lot of progress. And not only that, but we get CLE credit. And not only that, but they are our best attended webinars. And that tells us something. That tells us you people need a lot of help. You need help, people. And I say that kiddingly, of course, but we're all here to help. And one thing, and then I'll throw it back over to you, Colleen, I've noticed on the chat, we see people signing in saying, hey, from Chicago signing in, from Dakota, one of the Dakotas signing in, Virginia. And that sense of community, I think, is so important. And COVID knocked all of that sideways, but we're dealing with it. And I think just being aware of the topic of wellness, aware that these times bring out extra stress, that's half the battle right there.
That's right. I mean, one of the goals, one of my personal goals of coming here today was to, and one of my goals when I write and speak about well-being in our industry is to make sure that everyone knows that you're not alone, right? I mean, the data is showing that many of us are struggling with some particular issue or another. The data is showing that we are longing for community, for belonging, for connection. You are not alone. So that's one of the things that I wanted to make sure we address today. In a little bit, we will address the other thing, which is that we're going to leave you with 4 very practical, tangible tips and tools that you can immediately implement in your life, starting today, and then grab and use whenever you want to going forward.
Well, that sounds great. And a final word on this first topic, well-being and professional competence. The big change that I have seen in my life and career is that taking care of yourself, and by extension, your firm, your practice, is a part of being a competent lawyer. And it kind of stands to reason. How can you be competent if you're not together, or if you're freaked out all the time? How can you be fully competent, at least?
You
So
know,
I,
us lawyers, we like analogies, right? So I have two analogies that I like to use because I think we're culturalized as lawyers to constantly be putting our clients first, right? That's a fundamental premise of what we have to do in our fiduciary duty to our clients. Well, I think some of us go too far and we don't take care of ourselves at all. So I have two analogies. One is if you run out of gas and your car is on the side of the road, you're not going to get to whatever destination you were trying to get to. So if you're trying to serve a client, if you're trying to help the community and you run out of gas on the side of the road, you are going to be impeded from actually accomplishing your goal. So you've got to stop and fill up your gas tank. And the second one is the saying that everybody knows, which is you can't pour from an empty cup, right? You cannot give what you don't have. And so, and then the third, I guess, is the airplane oxygen mask, put your own on before helping others, right? So let's just remember those analogies that this is important and worthwhile work for us to be doing. I used to think that it was just a waste of time. And if I wasn't billing, if I couldn't put point one or more down on the timesheet, that it wasn't worth my time, and quickly realized that I wasn't going to be putting any point ones down if I hit a wall and ended up on the side of the road with no gas in the tank.
I love it. Speaking of which, a perfect segue to our first audience question. Colleen, I hope you can see it up on the screen. And to our members of the audience, please take a look and you can answer it in real time. And we'll get the results here also in a few seconds in real time. And Colleen, what I love about your advice is how practical and sensible it is, but how easy it is for me to forget all of that stuff, you know. And if I am running out of gas and have an important meeting, that just makes me want to run faster, you know, and try to make it in time and really invite disaster, right? Increase the risk. That's sort of, that can be my default if I don't step back and say, wait a minute, if I don't have you here to teach me anyway. So while we're waiting, here are the results that have come in. And the question was, how have you been coping in the last month? Looks like worn out before the workday, less patient and motivated. Those are some of the issues, but quite a large percent either is coping well or have some of these issues, but doing pretty well. That's encouraging, I think.
That's great. Happy to hear it.
Happy to hear it. Yes.
When we get to some of our practical tips, feel free to put yours in the chat of what's helping you to cope so well.
Perfect. So maybe we can move on to the next topic. Speaking of which, coping with the challenges. We've sort of laid out the issues. The American Bar Association spent years putting out their report saying we've got problems here, and the problems aren't unique to our profession, but they may be exacerbated by our profession. And certainly COVID exacerbated everything. So how do we cope with that? Colleen, I throw it back to you.
Yeah. So one of the eye-opening things for me along my journey of moving from, overwhelm and feeling so tired when I laid in bed every night and then waking up to the alarm and feeling like it was Groundhog Day over and over again, moving from that to having more space in my life to be intentional and feeling like I was contributing and had space to breathe instead of just racing around, was to really understand the role of neuroscience and neurobiology at play. So to sort of understand some of that default wiring helped me to just conceptualize it better, but then also to realize that some of what was happening in my body and my brain was completely normal. There was nothing wrong with me. It's how our bodies have evolved for centuries to survive. And then once I had that insight, to help me start working with it instead of against it, right? And so what I'm talking about is what people often refer to as fight or flight. Some people know it as fight, flight, or flee. I mean, fight, flight, or freeze. And it's our brain's way of keeping us safe, right? And what I didn't realize at first was that a snarky email from opposing counsel, I perceived it as a threat, and I had the same physiological response that my ancestors eons ago had when a tiger was chasing them, right? My body and my brain do not know the difference between the two, and I react and respond physiologically without any control the same way, right? How do we know those signs? Heart race. We get hot or flushed, might start sweating. We might like get a dry mouth. We're suddenly not hungry, right? Because we don't need to be worried about food when our body says, no, priority number one right now is running away and staying safe and staying alive. We'll figure out where your next meal is coming from later, right? So realizing, instead of being at the effect of all of that, if I could start noticing that, that instant adrenaline rush when the lawyer's name on the email comes across who you really do not enjoy working with, right? And you see it and you instantly have that heart rate spike and, like you're armed and ready to do battle, that is a normal physiological response. And once we know that, then we can start using some of the tools that we'll talk about to practice choosing where to go from there, right? Instead of just having the knee-jerk reaction and writing the email back that you later regret, right? Pausing and figuring out what is the intentional choice that I want to make from here.
Well, to reinforce that, back when I was still practicing law, one thing I did was I represented lawyers who were in trouble, usually disciplinary trouble with the state bar. And invariably, there was some mistake. There was a mistake they had made. There was something they had done wrong. But really underneath, there was a much bigger problem. And that was harder to get to, often because they never acknowledged that one. And sometimes they just didn't want to admit the mistake. And that was the big problem. But so they were often their own worst enemies, which is not a good coping mechanism in the long run. It may work short term, but I found with my clients, it didn't.
Yeah, and the other thing that's really important to realize, whether it's a self-reflection or whether it's an observation of somebody else, whether it's a client, sometimes this is really helpful when we're working with our clients to understand that they may be in, it's called amygdala hijack. So there's a part of your brain, the oldest part of your brain that keeps you alive, they call it the reptilian brain, is called the amygdala. It's in the back of your brain. It's called an amygdala hijack because that part of the brain takes over because you have to stay alive in that moment. So you perceive a threat, your body responds to the threat to keep you alive, and the amygdala takes over. And what it hijacks is the front part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex. And this is important because the front part of your brain is responsible for executive functioning, higher level reasoning, memory, those types of things. And so we're not at our best when we're in amygdala hijack. Our clients are not at their best. So it's really important to be aware of that at play in our own lives and then in the lives of the people that we work with. The other thing that I learned relatively recently is that hijack, for our brain to reset, that the science is now showing that it takes about 20 minutes to reset. And so that, for me, I was flabbergasted when I learned how long it takes really to return back to homeostasis. Am I supposed to answer this question too?
Well, only if you're still listening. And you mentioned the science. I guess amygdala sounds like lizard brain sort of to me, and I so often, so much of my life has been directed by my lizard brain. But I'm working on it. I'm getting better, Colleen. I promise you, I'm getting better.
Yeah, well, it's a practice, right? We don't
It's a
start
practice.
off day one of practicing law being the best ever, right? We have to practice. We have to continually hone our craft. And we do the same thing with mindfulness, with well-being, with whatever it is, right? One of the other important things that came out of that ABA study and the National Task Force was defining lawyer well-being as a continuous process, right? That it's not just, okay, I'm going to arrive, I'm going to achieve it, and then my work here is done. It doesn't work that way. It's a continuous process. And the other piece of it was that it's multidimensional, that our well-being is multifaceted. And I like that as well because one, it recognizes sort of this whole person view, which is really important to me personally. And I think the industry is slowly coming around to the notion that, we are whole beings and we have other interests outside of just practicing law that are important to us, and that lots of different dimensions are at play, and that there needs to be some amount of integration of different dimensions.
Right, exactly. And what I will tell you is, even though I freely admit to being lizard brain for much of my life, I'm lucky that that I usually had good mentors. I had good parenting, so I got good advice, and often we dealt with some of the same issues, but now we have names for it. And I remember, Colleen, when I started representing clients who were in disciplinary trouble, at first I felt very nervous because maybe I had never practiced in their area. I hadn't done what they presumably did wrong. I didn't really even know the terms that well. So now we sort of talk about that as that could have been imposter syndrome, but back then it was just stressful, and I felt, oh, I'm going to be seen as a phony. Now it's easier to talk about it because people are giving it names and lots of articles and resources, and you realize, oh, lots of people feel that, especially if you haven't done it before. So
Yeah.
Your comments?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So like you, I represented lawyers, usually not in a disciplinary hearing, but usually in a civil matter where I was defending them against a civil malpractice claim. And so talk about stress, right? I mean, we are stressed in general on any given day with any particular client, but when it's our own brethren, and but for the grace of God go I, right? You could be in your own client's shoes, um, and that it's their livelihood potentially on the line. The stakes are high, um, and the majority of my clients were just trying to do the right thing, and maybe it was just a human error. So I found myself regularly telling my clients that the standard of care is not perfection, right? The standard of care is reasonableness, and you are a human being, and human beings are, not going to be perfect. But that's hard for us because we have a perfectionism challenge in this industry. And one of the tools that I'm going to talk about today, I'll just tell you now because it's a good time. One of my clients who was a lawyer, given the circumstances, needed to make a disclosure to her client about this error. Under our ethics rules in North Carolina, we concluded that that's what needed to happen. And so we were talking about, role playing. How was she going to have this conversation with her client? Because it's very stressful. It's very challenging. You don't want to make it worse, but you got to follow the rules and all this. And she had seen on my website that I'm a yoga teacher. And she said, can you help me with any yoga stuff? And I said, well, if you want to, let's do a breathing exercise. And so we did that, and it really helped. And then and she said, well, okay, this is fine, but what do I do when I talk to the client tomorrow, because you're not going to be there holding my hand? And I said, well, I can't hold your hand, but you know where your hands are. And if you put your hands on the table and feel your palms resting securely on the table, you know where your hands are. Your hands are in this present moment. Just connect with your hands, connect with your breath, and you'll be fine. And she said that really helped her. She told me later, she said, I kept checking with where are my hands? Where are my hands? They're right here. They're holding the table. You can't see my hands are like, you spread them out and you like grip the table. And that is very grounding and steadying. When our lizard brain wants to send us off on all the worst case scenario thinking.
I think, Colleen, that mindfulness sort of exercise sounds so simple. Just wear your hands, because I think I often overthink things, and think there's got to be a complicated solution, and often just to ground myself, wear your hands, keep it simple. And that's why I found that the science, you're able to throw in enough brain science that gets my attention, because as a lawyer, I'm sort of skeptical of well-being and kind of too woo-woo stuff. But if you can sort of give me some science, that's evidence, facts, right? And my final comment is I love seeing the chats come through again, just often introducing where the people are from and saying hello, which I think is great. That's a sense of community. And also with some suggestions about mindfulness apps and books and stuff. So back to you, Colleen, with the challenges, or if you're ready to, and we have a question here asking the audience for their challenges, and in a minute we'll get their responses back. Why don't you move on with some of the coping mechanisms or practical things we can do?
Sure. Yeah. So I want to talk about 4 practical tools, tips that I find helpful. 1, for the love of all things holy, please designate a device-free area in your home. Give yourself permission to take a break from a screen for some designated period of time during the day. I have a few suggestions of where those areas could be. You, of course, choose whatever area you'd like in your home. But having some dedicated device-free areas, right? A long time ago, we used to have designated smoking areas. Let's have some designated device-free areas in your space, whether that's your home, whether that's your office. I tend to like for it to be in the home so that you have some space, right? The dinner table is a great device-free space. The bathroom, I know some of you take your devices into the bathroom. I know you do. I mean, give yourself a break. Give yourself a minute, 2 minutes a day where you are not looking at your device. And then your bedside table is another really important one. There are these old-fashioned things called alarm clocks, and they work. And then your device is not right there, ready at your fingertips for you to look at before your feet have even hit the ground to get out of bed in the morning. So just consider that the way you start your day is really important, and it's an indicator of how you're going to spend the rest of your day. And so if you reach for the device and you're already getting triggered by emails and you're already feeling stressed and overwhelmed about everything you have to do before you even sat up for the day or before you've even gotten out of bed, like that's not a great way to set yourself up for the day. So designated device-free areas. If you can't, well, I was going to say, and then on the same lines, also consider what's on your device, right? So taking social media apps off of your device may be a healthy thing for you. It was incredibly healthy for me. I noticed, I just did a trial. I did my own scientific study, my sample size of 1. And I just noticed, how do I feel when I have social media on my phone versus when I don't? And I really noticed that I felt less connected with my family. I felt a little bit more doom and gloom. Maybe I felt more like I was behind what other people were, this comparative comparing myself to other people. Um, and if you can't limit your own screen time, there are apps that you can set up that will like kick you off of a certain social media. You can put certain things on your phone to make it go to sleep or do not disturb at a certain time if you need help with that accountability. So that's tip number one. And then I think we might go to the results of the poll in a minute.
Well, the results are pretty clear that exercise and maintaining work-life balance, which could be inclusive of time for exercise and going to the gym, are the two big challenges that they're dealing with. And also dealing with people in distress. That's what you write about as, I think, secondary trauma or vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue. Again, whatever the label, we've all sort of experienced. It wears you out. It takes a toll dealing with people on their worst day or just on a bad day. Rarely happy to be there. So your comments about the poll, and then
I'm reading the great chat. I love this, that I used to work for a call center. The single most common reason we had for warranty calls on purchasing a new phone was I dropped my phone in the toilet, or my 5-year-old dropped the phone in the toilet. So secondary benefit of not bringing your phone into the bathroom is you don't need to replace it as often, perhaps.
Right. Well, and I think it's hard to resist the tug of email and texting, if only with loved ones. You got to go see. Oh, did they reply? And it's hard to fit that in because technology changes so fast and it's so everywhere. So it is a challenge, even for an old timer like me.
Yeah, and I have to credit my children for a large part of my self-awareness, because they hold a mirror up, right? They're young enough that they just mimic what I do. And so it's impossible. I mean, we can go around not looking in the mirror ourselves, right? But when my 4-year-old or 2-year-old are literally right in front of me pretending to be on their play phone and ignoring me or something, like when it's right in my when it's right in my face, the way that I show up to them is really hard to ignore, right? And then to see, gosh, that's really not the relationship that I want to have with my children, right? And along those same lines, when she was 2, one of my daughters was trying to help me by bringing me coffee that I had left sitting. It was really hot, it was hot, and I was afraid she was going to slosh it, so I like yelled, like, stop, don't do that, right? And I mean, that really was a real situation where I was worried that she was going to get hurt, but it was a knee-jerk reaction, right? As opposed to taking a split second to sort of choose my response. And for days, she would just repeat to me, Mommy, you yell at me, I sad, right? So it's really important to use tools that help support our own well-being, our own harmony, so that how we show up with others, regardless of who those others may be, whether it's our inner circle, whether it's our coworkers, whether it's our clients, right? So that they feel the benefit of that as well, though. For me, it was important to show up in a way that I wanted to for the people closest to me.
Yes, and even back when I was representing colleagues in distress, on bad days, they had messed up. I did feel, the pressure of call it imposter syndrome, but quickly I realized it wasn't about me, and I just had to get out of the way. They were the ones that had the problem, not me, and I just needed to get out of the way and do a good job for them, and things became a lot simpler. And I love the way you bring in children's stories. I can relate, having had, my children are now up here. Yours are probably still lower, but I love your children's stories. On your website, you have a story about one of your children wanted a light kept on in the hallway, and you didn't want to keep the light on, but the child said, it makes me feel like you're nearby, or it's comforting. And you said you had never really thought about it from their perspective. You just said, oh, you don't need a light on, and you have a night light or whatever. So understanding their perspective. And often my clients would say, I don't know what I was thinking, Jay. And that was honest. They didn't know. They were kind of confused and disgusted sometimes with their own behavior, or at least disappointed in their own behavior, because we've all been there. Anyway, so trying to understand where they were coming from was very helpful to me.
Mm-hmm. And they probably weren't thinking, right? I mean, that's kind of the point, is that often if we're looking backwards, the things that were, not as happy with the way we handled it were probably because we weren't making that intentional choice. We weren't slowing down. We were racing, we were feeling stressed, and whether our amygdala was really hijacking our prefrontal cortex or whether we were just overwhelmed by the stress of it, right? I mean, the studies also show that chronic stress, essentially when your amygdala is hijacked or you're triggered, your cortisol levels spike, right? So they go up and then eventually they come down and recover. But chronic stress, our cortisol levels stay up and they never come back down. And what that does to our brain is it messes with our ability to think critically, to be creative, and it messes with our memory as well. And so those are all really important things that we need to be able to do our jobs as lawyers. So those are all additional reasons why it's important to manage that underlying stress level.
Yeah. As is many of the responses in chat, everything from pickleball to knitting to petting your dog or your cat, wonderful things. But
yeah, you can see in the background here, you can't see it real well, but these are, in the pandemic, I did adult coloring. So I had mandalas and I used colored pencils. So along like the knitting lines, it was like a very, almost like a meditative thing. I had these mandalas and I was doing these tiny little coloring with these colored pencils. And then I ended up framing them because they turned out okay. But even something as simple as coloring with your children, or that's literally called adult coloring or coloring books or something like that.
And you found that helpful.
I did, yeah.
And you enjoyed it too, as well.
And then it turned into nice art, and then my kids wanted to get involved.
So when, yes. So let's move on. I interrupted you. You had said designate a device-free area in your home. Well, we have that at our home. I'm going to brag because it's a group effort. It couldn't be just me enforcing that rule, but we do have that in our place, and there's buy-in to it, which is necessary. Without the buy-in, it won't work. But anyway, so what are some of your other practical suggestions?
Yeah. So the second one is the emergency landing exercise. We talked a little bit about it. This is the one I used with my client so it's any sort of grounding exercise, right? So think if you're in a plane, emergency landing, you want to come down to the ground. So anytime that you're sort of spiraling, you're worst case scenarioizing, which I know is not a word, but I like to describe it that way. You're thinking too far down the road, like you're like a runaway train, that your train's gotten way left the station, off the tracks, way ahead of yourself. You want to sort of come back to the present moment of what's actually going on right now. So this would be a grounding exercise, emergency landing. You can do it with your hands, just resting your hands on the table. You can rest your hands on your lap. Anytime yoga philosophy, anytime your hands are palms down is supposed to be calming. Anytime your hands are palms up is supposed to be if you need a boost in energy. So if you want to be calm, then they'd be hands palms down. Similarly with your feet, right? If you just take your shoes off and feel your feet flat on the ground, supported by the earth, right? It's a very centering, calming, grounding thing. And then also, of course, with your breath can only be where you are. And so that's where it leads me to the third tool, which is a breathing exercise, which is part of mindfulness, right? Mindfulness doesn't have to be a breathing exercise. Mindfulness is just observing without judgment, which is really hard for us lawyers because we are trained And what we do all day, every day is to evaluate, judge, right, wrong, good, bad, should, shouldn't. So it can be a challenge, but it's a great challenge to start working on, which is to observe without judgment. So you're noticing without putting the evaluative judgment piece on it. So it could be noticing that there's people talking in the hallway, right? As opposed to, gosh, those people are so disrespectful and rude to be talking in the hallway loudly, right? It's just noticing it without judgment. And then I also like to describe mindfulness as elongating the gap between the stimuli and the response, right? So think of the neuroscience. The stimuli is something we perceive. So it could be the email, it could be a phone, it could be your body's response to the ding of the text message sound, right? Whatever that stimuli is, elongating the time between the stimuli and how you respond to it, so that you get to choose how you respond to it instead of the knee-jerk reaction and being at the effect of. And I have a free breathing exercise, a guided meditation on my website that you are welcome to access anytime. But I also thought that I would invite us to do it right now. It takes less than 0.1, and it's a technique called box breathing, which the Navy SEALs use in their training to make sure that they stay cool and calm under pressure. And I figure if it's good enough for the US Navy SEALs, it's good enough for us. So come into a comfortable way of being, whatever that is for you. Obviously, if you're on the phone and you're not in a secure space where you can do this, then please be mindful of, making sure that you're in a safe and secure place. But if you're in a seat, coming to a comfortable seat, if you're standing or on a standing desk, just standing in a comfortable way. Generally, we like feet flat on the ground, so uncrossing legs, sitting up nice and tall with the back straight, hands resting comfortably in your lap. If you want sort of a grounding, then the palms can be facing down. And I invite you to lower your gaze or close your eyes if that feels comfortable for you. I often find that I need to close my eyes because I'm just overwhelmed and bombarded by stimuli, visual and otherwise. And it just helps me have less of the squirrel moment, the distraction of everything all the time. So I close my eyes, I take one of my senses away, and just coming into this moment in this space and observing without judging or without changing your breath. So just observe your breath. You don't need to change it or do anything different to it. Just notice it. Is it shallow and quick? Is it slow and long? Just notice. And then we're going to visualize a box or a square, right? So we're visualizing 4 sides and they're all equal length. So we're going to inhale along one side, hold at the top, and exhale along the other side, and then hold at the bottom. So we're going to make a box with our breathing. So on our next inhale, we're going to think of inhaling up the side of the box. So we'll inhale, 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 inhale. We'll hold across the top of the box. And then we'll exhale down the side. Exhale, 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 exhale. Really push the air out. And then hold across the bottom. We'll do that one more time. So we'll inhale, 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 inhale. Hold it across the top. And then exhale, exhale, really pushing all the stale air out and holding across the bottom. And then just checking in with your breathing, checking in with your body, just noticing any difference between before the exercise and after. Again, coming back to the screen if you'd like to open your eyes. Again, you can do this without anyone knowing that you're doing this, right? Nobody has to know your box breathing. And you can do it anytime. You don't need anything in particular. You can do it anywhere, anytime. All right. So that was our breathing exercise, which is one sort of vehicle into mindfulness. There are all sorts of other ways to practice mindfulness, right? You can mindfully take a walk. You can, mindfully do anything, which is really to focus on being in the present moment and observing without judgment. You could mindfully unload the dishwasher. It's one of my least favorite tasks. So I probably should work on mindfully doing that instead of begrudgingly doing that.
Well, Colleen, thank you for that. It's difficult for me, the judgment part. It's easy when I have my eyes closed and I have my mug of tea beside me. But the minute I leave the house and I see the neighbor's trash is in my yard and the cars are not driving the way I want them to, it's easy for me to attach judgment to all of that. And it's all awful and they're ruining my day. And I exaggerate, of course, but
Sure.
but
Yeah.
it helps for the landing, like you say. It helps for me just to focus on, I'm gripping the wheel. This is not good. That I'm gripping white knuckles. Anyway, here's our final question. Which of the following practices are part of your self-care practice? Because that's really the most important piece here. Is what are our attendees doing? What are they doing every day when they're not on a Zoom webinar? So let's see what some of their activities are. And I think we've got designate a device-free place in your home, have an emergency landing, some sort of quick exercise to give you that little gap where you can make a smart decision, and then to center yourself and observe without judgment, and focus on your breathing. So those are some of the techniques you've taught us so far. What else would you suggest?
Yeah. So the fourth tip is having a gratitude practice, and it can take any form really that you'd like it to take. I like the rule of three. I mean, I was a litigator, and so I use the rule of three all the time in my legal arguments because that's what the psychologists say, that our brain has the capacity to understand three things and organize it around three things. So I like to do a gratitude practice of naming three things for which I'm grateful. And you can do it any time of day. You could do it to start your day. You could do it to end your day. You could do it anytime that you feel frustrated with your neighbor's trash can. It just helps you to really be present and focus on one, it shifts your negativity bias towards a positivity bias. And then two, it sort of helps you be present in this moment. I was trying to explain negativity bias to my mother the other day and telling her that, well, whatever it is you believe, you're going to then find evidence of to support. And so if you focus on what you're grateful for, that will help you be more in a positive mindset than a negative mindset.
That's a great tip. And the name escapes me, but there is a psychologist who's known as the founder of the School of Positive Psychology, who has experimented, has researched the efficacy of preparing a gratitude list, things that went right today before you go to bed, and it's found it has, you know, real world effects on patients who are suffering from various things. So that's so important. And here in answering our question, it looks like part of the self-care practice of 2/3 of our attendees is spending time with family and friends.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not surprising, they elected to come to a live webinar instead of just streaming something on their own time, to be in real time with other people. That's the next best thing than being in the room. And lots of gym memberships and regular vacations. So some healthy habits there, Colleen.
Yeah, that's great. And the other thing that I think is important to consider is as we're heading into the new year, right? People like to make New Year's resolutions. Some people do. And so one thing that I'll leave you with is start small, right? We can make huge changes with just one small step repeated on a regular basis. So we don't need to try to, revolutionize and move 5 different things in our lives because we're suddenly going to overhaul the entire state of being, right? Choose something that is specific, achievable, concrete, realistic, that you might actually be able to implement and stick with.
And one thing I chose is I took your advice and I took my shoes off. And so I'm barefoot. That may be too much information, but we're on Zoom, so it works. Thank you so much, Colleen. Todd, I think I'm going to pass it over to you now.
Yes, you are, because we are going to conclude in deference to the 1 hour time limit that we put on the webinars here. But I do want to say, in conclusion, first of all, the survey will open right after the event here. So stick around for that, fill out the survey. You got to complete the survey to get the CLE credit. The link to the survey will also be in post emails and open for 72 hours. So if you need any help with that, just reach out to us and we will make sure you get the survey. And do not forget the codes for CLE. For the CLE is wellness and mindfulness, code 1, code 2. And I just want to say, Colleen, those are some fantastic insights and guidance from you. You discussed many really practical and great approaches during the webinar. And like for me, for example, focusing on what you're grateful for is always a good grounder for me. Because whenever I get kind of worked up a little bit, if I just get over there, it brings me to a really good spot. So that's the one I always like to try to focus on among all the other ones, like Jay was saying, driving the car. I'm not sure I can be helped there. But anyway, I want to express our sincere gratitude to both of you. You're both great, delivered valuable information to the participants, like I said, even to us non-lawyers. And I don't know about you all, but I know I can always use a little help with mindfulness and meditation for sure. I also will also say that, as I mentioned earlier, our webinars continue to grow in terms of participation. And that simply does not happen without you all joining us here. So a big thank you to everybody who took time to participate. And we hope that you too found this to be a worthwhile and valuable use of your time. Don't forget here now, Colleen and Jay will be staying on for another 10 or 15 minutes if you have questions you'd like to get answered. And with that, I'm going to extend my best wishes for the holiday season to each and every one of you. Don't forget, do the survey, code words, wellness, mindfulness, and I'll wish you a happy holidays. Right? Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. And maybe we could start with the questions that were in the Q&A to make sure we get to those in case anyone who asked those is still on. The code words were wellness and mindfulness, in case anyone was asking for that.
And also the manuscript is on the AltaPro RPG website, so you can download the manuscript. We didn't track the manuscript all the way through, but lots of good stuff in there. How about the question about a device-free bedside table. If that's your device-free room, what about smart apps or technology that may help you fall asleep? Or how do you juggle that, Colleen?
So I would say if you don't have a problem holding your boundary of not checking your phone upon rising, great, good for you. Then keep your device there, right? The device-free bedside table is for those of us, myself included, who need some help and accountability in saving ourselves from ourselves. My knee-jerk reaction, if the phone's right there, is I'm going to grab it and look at it, right? I do the same thing with candy. If the candy is there, I will eat it. So it has to be out of my sight. It's a structure that I need to put in place to support me in achieving what's important to me. Because there's nothing wrong with saying, I can't do this alone. I need some structure. I need some support. So if the falling asleep piece is important and the apps that help you do that are important, then great, by all means use those. If you need that and you also need help in the morning, you can set your phone. If I only know iPhones, but you can set up your phone to not let you check it at a certain time, right? I mean, you can put it's like in the focus tab and settings, you can tell it to not let you use it during certain times. Some email servers you can set them up to hold your email and not let it come through until, for instance, 9 a.m., right? You could have it deliver your email in batches so that, it gets pushed at 9 a.m. and noon and 3 p.m. And so you're not constantly getting pinged with emails. You're getting, all of the group in batches at one time. So that would be some of my thoughts on that.
Right. And Colleen, I'm gonna just interject here. My time shows 1 minute past. So if anyone is still on the webinar is officially over, the CLE portion, and you're welcome to hang out for a few more minutes. And if you have a specific question for our guest, Colleen, so I'm going to plow through there as well, plow into that question as well. It's always a tension, I think, between technology and sort of quietness and silence and centeredness. So there's some oppositional quality to that, I think. That maybe that just goes on in my mind. And I find that the less technology I find myself dependent on, and then I find, I've got to go check my email or something. Well, what does that say, about how dependent I am on my email? And can it be another way that I could not, meet that need without being annoying and having to get to a computer and check my email? So there's always that tension. And I think it sounds simplistic, but awareness is half the battle. That really is half of it, just to be aware of that and intentionally try to minimize that in my life. Because we do have device-free bedrooms. Those are the rooms. There's just no devices in it. Anyway, so other questions, Colleen? We have a few more minutes here.
One question is recommended reading. Travis, help me hone that in a little bit, specifically on the topic. My initial thought that came to mind, you may not like because it's specifically around yoga philosophy, but it was so helpful for me because I took the yoga concepts and applied them to my legal practice, right? Because what I found was this cognitive dissonance where I could find some peace and respite at the end of my yoga practice, right? So for me, having a regular yoga practice led by a teacher, right? Not my own. I couldn't, for a long time, I couldn't do my own practice. I couldn't stay on my mat. I couldn't stay focused. But being in a class or online led by a teacher, I could eventually get some peace in my brain, which is why I ultimately went through yoga teacher training. So, but I couldn't do it in my law practice. And reading this book, which I'll put, I don't think I can put it in the chat, The Yamas and the Niyamas the yamas, Y-A-M-A-S, and niyamas. Deborah Adele, A-D-E-L-E, is the author. But that's a very yoga specific answer to your question. Ben, someone's asking for my email address. If you could put that in the chat. I just don't think I can respond to everybody. So Travis, if there's a specific subtopic of reading that you'd like me to focus in on, let me know. And I will try to answer you more specifically, other than Deborah Adele's yamas and niyamas, which you have to sort of be open to yoga philosophy. But I mean, the principles are not that different from Christian principles, right? It's like first one is do no harm, it's nonviolence, and second one is truthfulness, right? Like, it's not crazy town. It's just sort of a slightly different angle and a different application that helped me sort of bridge that gap between how I felt on my yoga mat and how I wasn't initially able to feel in my daily life.
Yes. Thanks for the recommendation. Also, I have found in my, when it comes to sort of physical movement, physical activity, which is key, that's essential, whatever it is, just walking, stumbling to the mailbox and back. If that's all there is, that's better than nothing. Is Chi Running, C-H-I Running. It's a very popular running book out there that combines some meditative and mindful principles into running. And pretty much anything Bruce Lee wrote, on the martial arts guy, all of his stuff is very meditative and mindful. And for me, the key is ritual, having it ritualized, so I don't have to wake up and decide, where am I going to slot it in today? I'm going to run at 4 o'clock. And that's what I do. That's my thing. Shuffle. I shuffle these days. I don't really run, but so I'm going to shuffle at 4, and then I don't have to fit it in. It's already there, and I can fit other stuff in. So forgive me for jumping in there. One question that I do want to comment. Robert asked about incivility and just bad behavior in the workplace. Well, there's never any place for that or excuse for that, and that's been true since I've been around and been in workplaces. And the tragedy is not so much that people do that behavior, because they probably always will be bad actors, but it really can poison an environment and can erode your enthusiasm and your confidence of coming to work, especially for younger professionals. So I think that sort of toxic mindset, anti-positive mindset, negative mindset, can be very damaging, as well as the positive mindset, very healing and nurturing.
Yeah, and this is hard to do, but you mentioned earlier, Jay, that it's not about you, right? When you were talking about working with your clients, that it's not about you. And that's, again, it's hard to get to that point, but on that incivility piece, right? The person who is being incivil, it's not about, if someone's being incivil towards me, it's not about me, right? It's really their stuff, their problem, their inability. They're getting hijacked. Their amygdala is hijacked. They don't have good coping skills. They lack self-awareness, right? That's not easy for you to be on the receiving end of, and it's not an excuse. So don't hear me saying that. But it does allow an iota of compassion, right, for them, and an ability sometimes to then disengage and not take it with me, not let it impact me, right? Like, I don't have to let somebody else's incivility be a monkey on my back, for instance, right? Like, I don't have to carry it around with me. I don't have to let it bring me down.
Right. We have any tips for helping center during trial? I guess you're in the trial, high stress. You're right in the center of the hurricane.
Yes. And before I get there, Beth just put in the chat a lot of fantastic authors that I wholly agree with in terms of people to read.
Oh, there's so much great, as you know, Colleen, there's so much good resource out there. And we all have our favorites, our favorite gurus that have spoken to us. And really kind of resonated. It makes sense to us. Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now, you know, millions of people found that very accessible. His advice, very, very practical, to stay focused now before you jump right into my lizard thinking or whatever. Of course, that's the trick, to stay centered now. But I think simply knowing that I need it, such as if I'm in trial, thank heavens I'm no longer in trials these days, but if I was, just knowing I need to center now, that may be all it takes, because then I can focus on my hands, you know, okay, I'm here, I've got this, right? I can breathe. Anyway.
Yeah. So this may sound woo-woo, and I apologize if it does. I don't know, Anne, if you're into essential oil, but it's a little bit of essential oil on your wrists can be very helpful to sort of calm you and remind you that you've got this. They make little pendants that have like this little I don't know, piece of cloth. You can put essential oil in a pendant and then wear it like as a necklace, if that's something that resonates with you. If it's not, you always have your breath. You always have your hands. Getting plenty of rest before, like I know not during trial is probably impossible, but trying to get as much rest on the front end and the back end. Pushing all the other stuff off of your plate if you can, if you have any ability to delegate as much as possible all the other things that are not trial. You probably already do this, but like clearing the runway, so telling family and friends in advance, like, hey, this is really stressful and I'm just not going to be available for this period of time, and you know, so I need you to I really need your support, and the way you can, you know, show me that you support me is by whatever it is you need, whether that's leave me alone or check in with me, whatever feels supportive for you. Knowing that you always have people you can talk to. I'm not sure which jurisdiction you're in, but one of the things that that hopefully most jurisdictions have some sort of lawyer assistance program, or like North Carolina, we have a bar cares, which is not to say that you have some huge problem. It's a resource that's there. It's an ear to listen. It's a shoulder to lean on. You know, I'm not saying that it means anything that you have some pathology or some big problem. You can just call anyone to be a sounding board. I know in North Carolina, Lawyers Mutual Insurance Company is a great, you know, they will always be good sounding boards. I hope other jurisdictions have similar insurance companies that are that great of insurance companies for lawyers.
Thank you, Colleen. We've got time for one more. I'm getting a hook here from Ben, a virtual hook off the stage. Thanks for sticking around. We've got time for one more, and the comment is about just the general incivility and the ugly tone and discourse that is in the world, and it's hard. Was the comment, wasn't so much a question as a comment. It's hard to stay focused. And hard to practice law under such conditions. And all I can say is, yeah, I bet it is. I know it is. I'm sure it is. And that's why it's so important. That's why you call it self-care. These are things you can do yourself, to yourself, so that when you step out into the world that is so polarized and loud and noisy, you're as protected as you can be, and you're ready to go.
Thank you so much for having me on. For those of you who are still on, you know, if I can ever be a resource, feel free to reach out, and I'd love to support you. I know that the folks here at Alta Pro have been very supportive, and I appreciate being here. Wish everybody happy holidays.
Yes. Thank you, Colleen.